Thank you very much for joining us, everybody, here. My name is Philip Stuckey, with his Henry Rogers as well, joined you. And we coming to you with a central question here. There is a bombshell report that the Virginia State has officially released about what happened in the Charlottesville riots back in August. Now, of course, this report, Henry, basically lays all the blame at the liberal city council of Charlottesville, as well as also liberal city police chief, the Charlottesville Police Department as well. Henry, what do you think about everything?
So in this couple 100-page report that we got in today, there was a couple of serious bombshells that were released, which, as you said, just completely ripped apart the city council, the Charlottesville City Council, as well as the mayor and generally everybody who was in Charlottesville at the time. Now, they were mentioning a lot of different situations that happened there and giving some interesting reasons as to why the violence actually stirred up and led to where it led.
Yes, yeah, and so we're actually going to go through exactly everything that went wrong according to this report. But first of all, before you go in, check in, let us know exactly where you're from. We'd love to hear from you, hear what you think about what happened in Charlottesville. President Donald Trump, of course, said that there was some good people on both sides. This report, of course, said there's some very bad people on one side. But first of all, okay, so the report, first of all, mentioned that the thing that struck out to me was that there was no training whatsoever for the Charlottesville Police Department or the Virginia State Troopers. Did not engage in any training whatsoever prior to this march, despite the fact that they had several months of advance warning, folks, including the fact, one of the things the report, I exactly quote, efforts to train police officers ahead of the August 12th event were meager, if non-existent. We learned that the primary method of conveying information to officers was through roll call training. Basically, essentially, Henry, whenever you have an event such as this, we of course saw in Dallas, where basically they actually ran drills ahead of a riot like this. But Charlottesville just completely, kind of almost phoned it in.
No, and on the scene, Philip, we kind of sensed that, when we were there on the ground. As you all might have know, the Daily Caller News Foundation was on the scene there, reporting live from the horrific
reporting live
scene
from the riots
in Charlottesville, where we kind of watched the police kind of back down. They were not prepared. They were not prepared for this crowd here. And the report emphasized that. The report showed that these police officers were basically not allowed to be well trained for this event. Yeah. Now they were not allowed because the events plans were changed the day before by the Liberal City Council, which kind of screwed this whole thing up, Philip.
It did. It really did. And so, of course, the officers didn't really know what to do. But the most important thing, even above that, is that there was no coherent plan. In fact, matter of fact, due to the actions of the city council, because they kept trying to move the actual place where the event was supposed to be held, the Charlottesville Police Department was not able to come up with an official plan until the day before. Now, usually, Henry, these things are packed out months, weeks in advance. There's drills, like everybody exactly knows what's happening. But unfortunately, there was an official report. There was an official plan that came through, but it did not ever get approved. I'm going to repeat that to you. This official plan, the plan that would manage the crowd, the plan that would manage the traffic in Charlottesville on that fateful day, was never approved or seen by the police chief, the police commissioner, or any lieutenants on the police force.
And I just find that whole thing just absolutely disgusting.
Absolutely disgusting.
Completely. Having been there and seen that is disgusting. And you know what else was disgusting that I read in that report, Philip, was the fact that these officers had received some riot gear in the mail.
That's exactly right.
That was meant for it was meant for, you know what I meant by that. It was meant for this event specifically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and guess what? They weren't allowed to wear it.
They were not allowed to wear the riot gear. So the city of Charlottesville actually purchased riot gear for every single police officer that was supposed to be out there, hundreds of complete outfits, but they were not given to the police officers. So probably 90% of the officers that actually had to wear riot gear that day had never even seen it before. Didn't know how to put it on, didn't know how to size it, didn't know anything. In fact, a lot of these troopers here were actually feared for their lives. A bunch of them actually went to their supervisors, begging and crying to be able to wear the riot gear before this event took place, but they were actually refused.
And I think that they knew about this, and this is something that we kind of learned about today more. They learned about all of this from a July 8th protest that was very similar to the one that we were witnessed in Charlottesville. Right. In this protest, another kind of race war there in Charlottesville occurred on July 8th, about just a little bit before, a month before the Charlottesville protest, where similar instances happened, and guess what?
No, nobody cared. So going off of that, so there was Charlottesville police and the Charlottesville City Council and the commissioner and everybody else. They had the people had every expectation to expect that they knew what they were talking about, because there were two events that happened in Charlottesville involving members of the KKK, involving other protest groups. Basically, that these groups had clashed before. And there was a report actually out that said that the police needed to work towards making sure that clashing groups didn't actually touch each other. Well, guess what they did? They just pushed the two groups in front of each other. And even they ignored other agency intelligence. The Charlottesville Police Department received actual intelligence from the NYPD, from Washington, D.C. police, from Kentucky police, Texas police from all over the country were essentially trying to help the Charlottesville Police Department manage this crisis, but they ignored the intelligence. They had intelligence about the alt-right people saying that they would, that members of the alt-right group would try and actually work up a relationship with members of the Charlottesville Police Department, but not to trust them because they would stab them in the back. And that was ignored. Another report that some of these groups, they would ultimately comply with some of the police orders, but that they shouldn't be allowed to interact with the protesters, which is, again, a piece of advice that was promptly ignored. In fact, the police chief himself acknowledged in the investigation that intelligence never even was considered during their planning stage. And that, to me, is simply disgusting.
It's horrific. I mean, these people from Berkeley who are witnessing these horrible protests just months before are getting in touch with the Charlottesville police, give them a heads up what to expect. This is what you got to worry about with Antifa. This is what you got to worry about the right side here. So they have this knowledge prior to the event. They have all this knowledge, but they didn't use it. They weren't allowed to use it. Yeah. They were not allowed to use it. And this report is just like every sentence is negative, something negative about either the city council or the police.
That's exactly right. And the next point that I'm going to make here, folks, is going to be a little sensitive here, because we're going to talk about the woman who died in Charlottesville that day. Basically, the Virginia, if you're familiar with Charlottesville at all, the downtown mall area is a pedestrian-only area, and there are two roads that go one way. One goes north and one goes southbound. This accident that happened on August 12th was happening on the southbound lane, and so this was actually this road was closed off in the initial police plan and strategy for this event. But unfortunately, one of the police officers, her name was Shiflett, she was supposed to be in that position. However, she was a school resource officer at an elementary school, and she had just gotten off of duty from an elbow surgery. She had surgery a couple months before this event, and she actually radioed in, said that she felt unsafe, and so they pulled her back and only left a wooden barricade there, a sawhorse, actually is what they called it, in that place. And that's exactly why people were allowed to drive on the mall, which really kind of led to this decision. There was people on the ground that made the decision to pull this officer back, and that's exactly why we had a tragedy that day.
I mean, it really is sad to say that is a clear reason as to what happened. I mean, it could have been prevented, but it wasn't. City council decided to change their plans up the day before they knew that thousands of people would be entering the small city of Charlottesville, Virginia. I mean, come on.
Yes, they heard intel they heard about Black Lives Matter coming in from all across the country, Antifa from all across the country, but they did absolutely nothing to change their preparedness.
They also refused to arrest people because they were worried. They were worried about their own safety. The police, who are here to protect and serve, were worried about protecting and serving the people who they should have been protecting and serving.
Exactly.
I mean,
so we're going to help you wade through that
disgusting.
sentence there. But essentially, basically, there was a strong disconnect with strategy on the part of the police. So officially, for this investigation that has been recently uncovered, the police in charge, the sergeants, lieutenants, the police chief, they all said that they gave their police officers a list of potential violations that would occur, and they told investigators that they gave them permission to arrest basically anyone on site that they saw breaking those laws. However, that was not the case. The people that were actually on the ground, like the unit leaders and things like that, they were told that they should not be arresting people, that it was a danger to the police officers themselves, and that they should not be a part of this at all. In fact, one person said, Lieutenant McKean of the Charlottesville Police Department said that he was not sending his guys out there to get hurt. I mean, seriously, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, your job is to protect people from getting hurt, and you're going to sit there on the single biggest day of your entire career and say, I'm just going to phone it in today because I don't want to get hurt. I'm sorry, that's what you're there for, honestly. It sounds callous. I love the police. I think that they do a great job, but at this point here, they didn't.
And this is when the state police came in and, of course, had to take complete control over the entire scene. They ran in there with their riot gear on, and they came in there and kind of, really locked this place down, as we saw. Yes. It was a serious lockdown.
Serious lockdown. Of course, now, it was locked down in one half of the park, which ultimately meant that everyone kind of got swept up into one final kind of riot ball.
Including the press.
Yeah,
and they mentioned that in the report.
Yeah.
They mentioned that, beforehand they were trying to prevent, the press kind of being in the middle of these two groups. But they did nothing to prevent it. They just put us right in the middle of these two angry groups, and here we saw what happened.
Yeah, and so we saw a lot of mistakes. We saw a lot of serious mistakes and errors here. But what happened? So there was an investigation that was called for by Governor Terry McAuliffe. And of course, what does the Charlottesville police chief do other than try and threaten his underlings to not cooperate with the investigation? The people in the investigation said, quote, Chief Thomas's attempts to influence our review illustrate a deeper issue within the Charlottesville Police Department, a fear of retribution for criticism. This is a person basically who said that a lot of the officers actually refused to speak with the investigators, the state-sanctioned investigators here, because they were afraid of their jobs. They were afraid of the Charlottesville police chief and the Charlottesville city leaders basically getting on them for telling the truth about what happened during a national tragedy.
Right. So, Philip, let's break that down. So, say I was a police officer. I saw a member of Antifa attack someone, right? Someone who was on the left attack someone on the right. If I wanted to report that to a higher up officer, I would technically risk I would be risking my job. I would be risking this is what the officers feared. They were fearing that their jobs were in risk.
That's exactly right.
Due to the politics behind it all. It's just so disturbing. So disturbing.
Yes. Eventually got so bad, the report concluded that the city of Charlottesville and the government preserved neither the right to protection and the right to maintain order. And this has led to a deep distrust of government within this community. Now, of course, so we have a fundamental disconnect from the Charlottesville police leaders. And of course, we mentioned that during our early reporting after the Charlottesville rally, where essentially we said that it felt like the Charlottesville police approached this event by acting like they were trying to minimize the conflict between police and the protesters. And that's obviously here because they did not want to do anything. I don't know why they were even there. They could have been out, eating cotton candy at the state fair or whatever for that matter. But essentially, even if the police were doing their jobs 100%, and even if you had people that actually wanted to do their jobs in Charlottesville, which, of course, I'm sure some people did, but if you had everybody in the police force that actually wanted to do their jobs, they still got undercut by the liberal city council who had a political agenda here. Because essentially what they did, they chose. So basically we talked about the fact that this group, the city council, had months to decide on whether or not to allow a permit for this particular location at this park in Charlottesville. They chose to wait until a week before the event to order the moving to a larger area. Now, that unfortunately, they are citing that because it's such a large crowd, but the fact of the matter is they knew it was a large crowd. It was a large crowd in July, it was a large crowd in May, but they still allowed those to happen. And so what happened was they moved this event, which caused the Virginia State Police, the Charlottesville Police, the Albemarle Police, and the UVA Police to have to completely scramble and change their preparedness plans from one location to another. And then eventually that got moved within hours of this rally actually starting back to the main location. And so really, I mean, I think the biggest quote here that the finalized part of the report here, city leaders waited until just days before the event to act. Waiting until the week before the event to move it away from the location requested by the organizer negatively impacted both planning and communications. And what we've seen here today is that there was no motivation for moving this location other than something that was political. We don't want to have this here because we don't like what they have to say. And you know what? This is disgusting. That we have a political body that has one political objective here and had made a decision that in the long run ended up costing lives. And that, honestly, is just, screw it. You know, because if we are having if we have a police force that doesn't do their job, if we have a governing body, a local governing body that says, you know what, we don't care about the Constitution, we don't care about the safety of our citizens, if we have a governing body that ultimately fails us on every single level, what are we doing here?
It's just, you know, it's something that, as you said, Philip, we watched, we witnessed, and something that hopefully police departments across the country will learn from. Because this was something that was so disturbing to watch, so disturbing to read. I love the police. We love the police. We don't ever want to read something like this or witness anything like this again. Right. So, you know, hopefully some lessons were learned here by the Charlottesville City Council, who made these decisions despite what they had learned previously.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. This is Protester Game Day. Unfortunately, a very sad episode, but we will continue to broadcast to you our coverage of the protests going in and around the Beltway. Thank you very much for joining us. This is Philip Stuckey with the Daily Caller News Foundation.
This is Henry Rogers with the Daily Caller News Foundation.
Thank you very much, and hope you have a great day.